Can you experience purgatory on earth? You can. I have, and a friend of mine has, and I want to share both these stories, mine at the end, because it's a story that you've possibly heard before, along with other beautiful details about this idea. If you would like to support this channel in any way, please do so through Buy Me a Coffee. Let's get right into it. So this idea of experiencing purgatory on earth has been around. Many people have thought about this. It has been talked about, especially you read about it in Maria Simma. She tells of this amazing story where you had, I believe it was a nun and a priest, both of which loved God greatly, and they were talking about the holy things of life. And they talked about asking the Lord to send them all the sufferings necessary so that upon death, they would enter heaven immediately. The priest had this fear and this lack of trust in God. The nun trusted in the Lord, asked for the sufferings. She received difficulties in her life, but then upon death, she appeared to another one of her sisters in religion, glorious and with all the merits of all the sufferings that she went through. The priest, on the other hand, appeared to that same person, showing himself as in a very deep part of purgatory because he did not trust. Now let's talk about why this is difficult and some of the things that possibly can happen. So the friend of mine that has experienced, she describes it as hell, but it could be interchangeable because sometimes the sufferings in purgatory will feel like those that a person might experience in hell, except without the sense of a lack of hope. That's the difference between purgatory and hell. Is in purgatory, you have a love for the Lord and hope. Hope being the hallmark characteristic, the difference. She spoke about everything was going fine in her life. And then she entered into a period of about 1 month of a type of spiritual darkness, where she experienced certain fears in regards to purgatory that were significantly more intense than normal. She also experienced a hatred for religious things, particularly some of my videos, myself and my wife, as well as other things having to do with the faith, things that normally she would not experience. As she's telling me this story, this all sounds a lot like what someone might call the dark night of the soul. Now, normally when this happens, this is an extended period of purification that God will bring people through. It doesn't necessarily have to happen when someone's advanced in their spiritual state. It can happen at different points in your spiritual journey where you receive kind of like a portion of it. But it's essentially a moment when God pulls away his grace, so to speak, the feeling of grace, for the sake of that person being purified. Often, whether we know it or not, we're following God because of the sugar, because of the good stuff, because of the blessings, right? That's what a lot of us are, that's why we're following God, even though we don't want to admit it. And so in certain circumstances, to raise that person to a higher level of holiness, he withdraws his consolation. He makes what was wonderful and beautiful be distasteful, even sometimes having that person suffer through having blasphemous thoughts. The saints have gone through this. All types of spiritual trials where it is difficult to follow God. And the goal for that person is to remain faithful. A lot of times when people hear about this, they think that we're in control. So they tell the person, you must have committed some sort of sin, go get deliverance, go do this, go do that. Sometimes there's nothing that you can do. The greatest spiritual advice that you can receive is, you are not in control. God is in control. There may simply not be anything that we can do. Even the best spiritual director may not be able to help you because God is the one allowing this type of suffering in your life. Even if you go to confession, even if you pray more, which are things that you should do, and seeking wise spiritual counsel, even then, this darkness may not be removed from you. Saint Faustina went through something. She experienced a brief period of spiritual darkness at different points in the diary. I don't remember exactly when, but afterwards, she experienced like a new life, which is what my friend said. So this lasted in her about a month. Terrible suffering, as she said, I wish this on no one. It was like a foretaste of hell. And afterwards, she experienced a new life. Certain things healed in her. Obviously, a tremendous gratitude for what God has done for her, and a much deeper sense of the holiness of God in the Eucharist, and of our salvation. So if you are someone that is going through this, know that it is probably not your fault. In fact, it is probably a good sign. There's nothing you can do, most likely. Nevertheless, do what you can and see if there are things that you can do for it to lift. And don't just call any spiritual difficulties a dark night of the soul, because that is a very specific stage in the spiritual life. So at times, we're not even sure what it is that we're going through until much afterwards. And part of this is what makes it so difficult. We can't really even call it dark night of the soul until after. For instance, this was a really good case example with Saint Mother Teresa. Now, my own experience was having to do about 2 years ago. So 2 years ago, August 2nd, 2022, my wife and I were going through some difficulties. She was going through some of her own faith challenges, and it was causing some friction in our marriage. At the time, I was also asking the Lord to allow me to experience some of purgatory, if that's what he willed. Whenever we ask God for something, he can always choose to say yes or no. So whenever we ask, the implication is, God, your will be done. So I was asking for this grace, but with a lot of fear and trepidation, because I knew that if he gave me the grace, it was not going to be fun. Trust me, it was an awful experience. So this is how God gave it to me. At the time, I was doing a lot of mountain biking with my son, sometimes by myself, sometimes with other people. I was really enjoying it as an amazing form of exercise. One day I went out on my own. It was in the middle of the day. I wasn't very busy that day. I went out to this typical biking trail, and it was one of these where you did the trail and then you went back, and that was the route. You basically repeated it backwards on the way back. So I finished kind of the first part of it, and there was this bench there. There was this amazing place to pray, and I prayed in this most amazing way. It was like about 10 minutes. I was such at peace. I was just in the Lord's presence. It was amazing. A lot of things going on in my heart about everything going on in my marriage, and kind of this sort of vague general asking of the Lord to grant me this experience of purgatory. Now, less than 30 seconds after I finished praying, I went on my bike onto this very little ramp, and I actually went too slow. And so I flipped forward, I landed on my head, and I broke my neck at C6 and C7. I was paralyzed on the ground for about 30 to 45 minutes, calling out about every 5 minutes, screaming at the top of my lungs for help. It was a little bit of an isolated area. It was next to a country club. There were some workers mowing the lawn that could possibly hear me, but I wasn't sure. I couldn't move. And several things happened to where I knew this was of God. As soon as I fell and was on my back and was paralyzed and could not move, it's like the Lord spoke to me and granted me this grace. Because normally, as soon as that happens, I start going into the past and thinking, I wish I wasn't here. I wish this hadn't happened. Why did I do that? And it was as if the Lord was telling me, accept what is happening. Be in the moment. Stay right there and trust me. That's what he wanted me to do. And so I did it. I thought, okay, this is my life. I'm not going to fight it. I'm not going to run away from it, mentally speaking. So I stayed there, and it was awful because I thought, this is my life. I'm going to be one of those guys, one of those that you hear about that is paralyzed. I was actually in that nightmare. I knew that it was an experience of purgatory because immediately and the whole time, especially in my arms, like right here in my forearms, there's a scientific name for it, a medical name for what this experience is like. But it felt like my arms were on fire, like they were literally burning. And upwards of about 24 to about almost 48 hours, that this part of my arm was so sensitive that when I was in the hospital later on, if the AC wind hit that part of my skin, it felt like it was on fire. It was the most intense burning pain I had ever felt in my life. And I've had several very high pain level things happen to me in the hospital. This was by far surpassing all of them. I wasn't experiencing any pain in my neck. I was experiencing some pain in my body, but it was particularly in my arms. They were on fire. And I immediately, as soon as I felt that, thought, this is purgatory. I'm experiencing what I've been asking. I knew at that moment that I was suffering for my wife, I was suffering purgatory, and that God was allowing this to happen. All in one moment, infused knowledge. It was amazing how I was able to understand that, which is why I was calmer than I normally should have been. Someone finally heard me, came and got me. They came and took me in an ambulance to one hospital, then had to transfer me to another one. That ride was horribly painful. It was extremely, extremely painful. They could not give me any painkillers because I needed to be fully conscious and alert so that they could see what they were doing. They eventually did surgery, which relieved some of the pain that I was having in my body. And then the next week, I was still having intense pains in my arms. That experience completely changed my life. You can go and see some of the shorts. Immediately that day, I knew that this was of God, so I had to record videos. You can go to my YouTube shorts and find all those videos literally as I was in the moment. As soon as I could, and I was in the hospital, I was recording. You'll see me with a neck brace, and I share another video that I did about a year later. Would I ask for that again? I don't know. I don't know if I could put my family through that. I sold the bike immediately, and I hardly ever want to ride mountain bikes. I just don't want to put my family in that situation. It was very dangerous. Should you ask for purgatory? I don't know. That's up to you. I would ask the Blessed Mother, because then you know that you have at least that kind of cushion of mercy that she decides, and she always kind of takes the most merciful approach. But we can ask for purgatory here on earth. That experience changed me, and I'm never going to be the same. It significantly impacted my channel. My channel would not be where it's at if it wasn't for that suffering. It greatly increased my love for the souls in purgatory. I felt like I was with them the whole time. In fact, purgatory is with me at all times, or a purgatory soul, because they had to do a spinal fusion. To do that, they actually have to take a piece of a bone. I don't know if it's from the neck, but from where a piece of a bone of another person, presumably a cadaver, a dead person's body, and they have to put that piece of bone so that so that C6 and C7 could be grafted into one bone. So it's like I'm carrying a dead person with me in my neck. So that's very real to me. So my friends, you can experience purgatory on earth. Would I recommend it? I don't know. When I'm in purgatory and my purgatory time is shorter because of these things, I'll tell you, ask for it, because this is terrible. Whatever suffering we experience here on earth, it's intense. But purgatory is 1,000 times more painful than you can possibly imagine. So with all these you can tell that I'm going back and forth because it was such a difficult experience, but don't be afraid and trust in the Lord. And I will see you in the next one.